recently I sat down to rewatch all the Indiana Jones movies again. Last time I watched these, I think I was like 10 or something. I don't really remember. But I wanted to see if they still held up. Because, like many people, I remember these movies being perfect. I mean, what's not to love? It's got action scenes, humor, evil monkeys, evil Nazis. After my rewatch of the
Tetralogy.
I found that they were pretty good action movies, but they still had their fair share of bad qualities to them. And I don't think that comes as a surprise to people. I mean, Temple of Doom and The Crystal Skull were both heavily criticized when they first came out. I know people like to shit on Crystal Skull, but I honestly think it fits in quite well with the rest of the trilogy. And I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So for now, let's just begin with the all-time classic. Alright, first up, Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. This movie is really good. It's damn near perfect, actually.
Now, what shall we talk about?
And that's not really surprising to hear. I mean, it's legendary for a reason. Everyone and their mother's seen this one. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this movie quoted or parodied. It's just everywhere on TV. Its reach is ubiquitous.
Yeah, like Indiana Jones. So I'll be friends with Indiana Jones.
Man crush. Man crush.
It's not a man crush.
And honestly, there's not much bad to say about it. So I think we should look at all the good things and why this movie is so amazing. And the first reason is not surprising at all. It's the opening. It's iconic. I can't think of another movie with a more iconic opening. If you've ever taken a film class before, I guarantee that you've studied this opening as your teacher sat up at the whiteboard pointing out how great the character introduction is and how it sets up the rest of the movie. And you know what? Your teacher's right. This intro does everything correct. And it's not just because there's booby traps or the boulder chase or because it sets up the villain. It's none of that. All those things are great, mind you. I love them. But think about if the movie didn't start with this. What if it started with the second scene? Indy teaching his archaeology class as the students hitting on him. It's like, what movie is this? What are we watching? But no, they don't do that. They set up the character first, and then they move into the boring stuff. I'm not saying the movie's boring, but there's definitely a tone shift that you can see between this and this.
They want. What do I want to see them for? What am I, in trouble?
The most effective thing in this movie, and the reason I think it's so memorable, is that the story is clear. It's a tight plot. Indy's going after the Ark of the Covenant and wants to beat the Nazis. It's like, boom, there you go. And while the other movies have very simple plots, I think this one just stands out. The other films, I think, get muddied up with other characters or how they get to their objective. But this one and how it's laid out, where they go from America to Nepal to Cairo, it all flows together very well. For the villains, we have Belloc and Major Arnold Toad, which are very well written, I must say. And I've always viewed Toad as sort of a terrifying person that lurks around in the background or in shadows, kind of like a pre-Hans Landa. I don't know, he just always creeped me out, and I'm not knocking the actor, but just the way he looks is so effective for putting fear into the mind of a 10-year-old. And while Nazis are hardly a controversial villain to use in a movie, Dr. Belloc adds a nice rivalry to the film that we don't really get in the others. Another thing I like is that the movie keeps itself grounded in reality, much more than the other films. I know there's ghosts and spirits at the end, but suspension of disbelief, so, who really cares? But everything seems very plausible in this. It takes itself seriously, but still has room for humor and lightheartedness, which I think the other films struggle with. They seem to go either one way or the other. But this one has a nice balance.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
The only real plot issue with this movie is that at the end, Indy knows to close his eyes, which this is explained in a deleted scene when Imam tells him to not look at the Ark. Because the way it's presented in the film, it kind of seems like a Deus Ex Machina, where he just knows to not open his eyes because he'll die. But other than that, I mean, the plot is pretty much solid. Another great thing about this movie is the relationship between Indy and Marion, because it seems like an actual 3-dimension relationship. It's not just Indy going after a woman for sex or them kissing, things like that. No, in this one you can tell that they had a real past and there is a connection between the two. Which she is gone in the other movies, except for Crystal Skull. But I really wish they explored them further. Other than that, I mean, you have some great fight scenes in there, some great chase sequences, great cinematography. I mean, there's not a lot to hate on this movie. I really can't think of anything negative to say. If you did want to make a complaint, I suppose you could say there aren't always the best effects, especially when it comes to the ghosts at the end. But it actually isn't really that bad compared to some of the other films which do suffer a lot with the CGI. And because they actually rely on practical effects and stunts, it helps it age quite well compared to the others. And it's just an 80s classic for a reason. I mean, no matter how you look at it, left, down, up, right, it's a perfect film. You probably love it too, and it's probably going to be listed on some of the most influential movies of all time. As we move into the last 3, I think all of them are a lot worse than Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm not saying that they're bad movies per se, but there definitely is a degradation of quality. And it's just hard to beat the original film. So next we're going to move into one of the craziest movies that I've ever seen. So yeah, as I said, this movie's crazy. It's hectic. And I don't think I've ever seen this one before. Maybe once when I was really young, but I don't really remember anything from it. So I was basically going into this movie with fresh eyes. Didn't have any expectations for it. I've seen some scenes before, some parodies of it. So I knew kind of what to expect, but I wasn't at all prepared for what I was about to witness. And the first major change that I noticed was something you just saw. It was the intro and the title drop. Whereas Raiders of the Lost Ark has one of the most iconic intros, this one stood out for how bizarre it was. How could anyone expect a dance sequence at the beginning of an Indiana Jones movie? Now the next 2 main things is the side characters. We have Ki Kwan as Short Round and Kate Capshaw as Willie Scott. And these 2, for the amount of hate I see them get, are awesome. Ki Kwan as Short Round is one of the funniest characters I've ever seen.
Short Round, step on it!
Okie dokie, Dr. Jones, hold on to your potato!
I also love seeing what he's doing in Hollywood today. And I hope that he wins his Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I know people hate on Kate Capshaw for her portrayal as Willie. They find her very annoying and needy the whole movie, which I don't disagree on. You know, we all know why she got the role. You know, she was with this stud. But there are a lot of funny moments with her.
Hey, I'm right here.
And I think her acting is not that bad. And not that bad pretty much sums up this whole movie. The biggest problem with Willie is the writing. I mean, we're gonna compare her to Marion from Raiders, and she can't live up to the relationship that her and Indy had together. In this one, Willie and Indy have like this weird will they, won't they kind of thing going on. You know, there's like a whole 5-minute scene where they're just like waiting for each other to have sex. Like, who's gonna break first? And it just seems very artificial. There's nothing unique or 3-dimensional about it. She's just kind of there for the ride and there for, you know, saving, I guess you would say, and some humor thrown in. But she's not a bad character. It's just, I think the writing was really bad for her, and Indy as well.
About! We're not sinking! We're crashing!
Grab on!
Now you can watch it on its own, and it's a pretty fun film to watch. But when looking at it compared to all 4 movies, I think it's best to look at it as a prequel to Raiders. Because it is a prequel. But I actually didn't know that until after the movie. I didn't realize when looking at the dates. But now that I understand it is a prequel, I think the movie gets a lot better in that context. And viewing it from that perspective makes the whole experience just more enjoyable. But what do I mean by that? Well, I think it has to do with expectations. Because one of the main criticisms with this movie is that it takes place mainly in one area, the temple. But I don't see it that bad in the eyes of a prequel, because as a prequel, it sets up the rest. So it is in one location, and I think that location is great. I think the set design for the temple is amazing. but it sets up the rest of the indie films where he's traveling more. You know, he's a little bit more inexperienced in this one. And you can see, I mean, in the beginning, he gives away an artifact for money, or for a diamond actually, but you know, the same. And we also see him mess up a lot throughout the film. He does a lot of stupid things I don't think we would have found in Raiders or even The Last Crusade. Which I don't particularly like as much as everyone else does, but in that one he's at least a little bit more competent. And not even 20 minutes into the movie, we get one of the most ridiculous stunts that I've ever seen pulled off. It's insane. I can't believe they actually did this. The characters on the brink of death jump out of a plane with an inflatable raft to land on snow and slide down the mountain. You know, this movie was really the start of the ridiculousness in the Indiana Jones franchise. Whereas I said Raiders was at least grounded in reality somewhat, these next 3 movies, starting with Temple, just get rid of that. They don't care about it anymore. And I also think the violence in this, while not liked by everyone, is actually very entertaining to watch in an Indiana Jones film. Because they always felt like they were playing it safe. You know, it's a family-oriented franchise, so they're not going to depict violence like this. And that's what makes Temple stand out so much. It is in one location, and it is violent. But I kind of like that. I kind of like how it's separate and has its own unique style compared to the other 3. And trust me, there's some brutal scenes in this. I mean, a man gets his heart ripped out, Short Round's getting whipped, Indy's force-fed Joe Rogan ayahuasca. I mean, it's crazy. The temple itself is one of the most impressive film sets that I've seen. I was actually blown away when I first saw it on screen, because it just looks so menacing. I was like, I can't believe they actually built this. It still doesn't compare to something like The Goonies, which I think is the best film set ever made. Hey, would you look at that? We talked about 2 Ki Kwan movies in one video. Some of the big issues that I have with this film is that, 1, the effects don't hold up as well as Raiders. The green screens are not that good, and I know it's an older film, so I shouldn't complain about it too much. It was a product of its time. But they do stand out compared to some of the other practical stunts. This film also creates some weird plot holes within the Indy franchise. Because for one, in Raiders, he laughs at the idea that the Ark could be supernatural or have magical properties, but he finds out about magic in Doom. You know, he sees Ram rip out the heart of someone while they're still alive, and he also drinks that weird ayahuasca. There's also voodoo dolls in this, and Indy himself lights the stones on fire just by saying words. So yeah, it does create a lot of issues down the line. Also, the whole arc in this one, not that one, the character arc in this is a little strange. Because at the beginning, we see him get rid of an artifact for a diamond. And so he's already going against his principle that we find out in The Last Crusade. You know, the whole, it belongs in a museum. I mean, he gives an artifact away at the beginning because he wants a diamond. And then I don't blame the ending of this where he returns the stone and basically says that the people should have it and it shouldn't be in a museum because, you know, it's theirs. And I don't really blame him for that. I don't hold that against his character arc. But the way he treats artifacts is very touchy. It's never one thing. He either wants to save them all, or he wants them in a museum, or he wants them back with the original people. And one of the last things I want to mention about this movie is that the climax is actually suspenseful. When we see Indy on the bridge with Willie and Short Round inching their way towards him as he's about to get captured, you know, there's actual tension going on. You think, how is he going to get out of this? Especially after this line Ram says,
Let her go! Drop them, Dr. Jones! They will be found! You won't!
And while we know that the hero's gonna win and save the day, it was still very fun to watch how he got to that point and his idea of breaking the bridge. But yeah, for essentially what is a first time viewing of this movie, I loved it. There are some, you know, glaring issues, but if you're just wanting something fun and entertaining, I think Temple of Doom is the best in the Indy franchise for that.
Bangkok is not on the way to Delhi.
You will go to Bangkok Palace.
I thought the palace had been deserted since...
No. Now there is a new Maharaja.
So I'll give it like a 7 out of 10, just for the pure chaos of it all. So far I think everyone has pretty much agreed with what I've said about Temple of Doom and Raiders of the Lost Ark, but on this one I might lose some people because I don't love Last Crusade. It's not bad, but it's definitely not as good as people say it is. To me at least. In theme with the last two, let's talk about the opening, because I don't love the opening. I don't care about Indiana Jones' backstory. To me, it just seemed completely unnecessary, like they wanted to throw something in to excite the audience, but it never really had any staying power. I mean, has anyone really cared, like, how Indy has got his fear of snakes, or how he got his hat? Like, have we ever thought about that before? I mean, maybe you have, but personally I haven't. I've never cared about it. It's never mattered to me, his backstory. I've just cared about who he is now. I love seeing River Phoenix, don't get me wrong, but the whole action sequence and chase sequence is not that good. It's kind of slow, and it doesn't really lead anywhere. I mean, it helps introduce his dad, kind of. All the backstory stuff, it never really mattered to me. And speaking of dad, let's talk about Sean Connery. Because I know a lot of people like the dynamic between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. It's the whole father-son duo thing. And they probably have a lot of memories of watching this with their dad, which is why they like the movie. Personally, I don't care for their interaction. See, this whole movie feels like a reaction to Temple of Doom. People were taken back by the racism or stereotypes and the violence, and so they took a step back and they're like, well, we don't want that again. Let's go back to Raiders, let's go back to what made the series in the first place, and let's try to replicate that. And majority of people will say they did a great job doing it. They did replicate the feeling of Raiders, the feeling of adventure that the first movie captured so well. And while I'm not disagreeing with that, I am saying that some of the inclusion of specifically the comedy was a little unnecessary. Because while Raiders took itself seriously and Temple of Doom was almost the complete opposite, where it was very chaotic, this one feels like it's trying to straddle the line between comedy and serious and goofy.
Do you intend to leave us standing on the doorstep all day with drenched? Look, that gun and caught a sniffle.
And it never really works. Every interaction that Sean Connery and Harrison Ford have, it seems very forced. It's like they're trying to put comedy in places where I don't really think it belongs.
Just sit down and think.
And I think people get blinded by the comedy because everyone made fun of Willie for complaining and being helpless the whole movie. But Sean Connery is basically that in this movie. He seems to only be there to berate Indy, and I get that berating and talking down is kind of part of their relationship and the story going along, but it's still annoying to see. You know, if it's annoying to see Willie scream the whole movie, it's annoying to see Henry just talk shit to Indy the whole time. And the only saving grace seems to be Indy and Henry getting a closer relationship at the end. I'm not saying everything is bad. A lot of the jokes are funny, and I did laugh a lot during it.
I gotta tell you something. Don't get sentimental now, Dad. Save it till we get out of here. The floor's on fire.
The Nazis are back once again as the villain, which I wasn't thrilled about. I like the distinction between Temple of Doom with Rom and the cult, and even Crystal Skull with the communists. But this one, going back to the Nazis, it seems like, why do we need to go back? Can't we think of something else? But there were some things I thought were just ridiculous. Like the whole Hitler scene and like him signing the book. It was just like, what's happening? I do love the plot of going to find the Holy Grail. I love the whole lore around the Holy Grail and what it represents. I wish they picked a different villain though, besides just Nazis again. And speaking of the Holy Grail, when they get to the climax of Indy going through all 3 different obstacles to get to the room, I find it strange how they conclude everything. Let me explain. So we see Indy going through all 3 different obstacles, right? And then once he's in the Grail room, Elsa and Walter come in. Elsa lies to Walter about which Grail is real, he drinks it, and he dies horrifically. So I actually do really like the effect that they did here for it as well. It kind of reminds me of Toad's death in Raiders when he melted and they used the wax figure. But he drinks it. We see how bad it is when someone drinks the wrong cup. Alright, so that's good. It sets up tension, right? Wrong, because just after this, Indy gets up, he looks at the grail for about 5 seconds, and he says, this one is it. This grail is the grail, because it wouldn't be made out of gold, because he's a carpenter. And then he takes it over to the water, and there's supposed to be a big buildup, because if he drinks the wrong one, he's gonna die. But he takes it, he just drinks it.
You have chosen wisely.
And then he leaves. And I understand the tension is that Henry is dying in the other room, so they can't spend a lot of time on the grail itself. But once they get back to Henry, it's not even like a fake out death or anything. He just gives it to him, and then he lives, and then they leave. So I feel like the tension was ruined. There was a huge buildup just getting to the room, and then when you're faced with all these options, I get that they're using logic that it wouldn't be gold, but I think there should at least be something else to, help raise the stakes. Especially when we're dealing with something that grants you immortality. The whole climax gets resolved in about 30 seconds from choosing it to drinking it and then getting back to Henry. It's all like 30 seconds to a minute long. It's not, it's not anything significant. I know I'm shitting on the movie a lot, but I don't actually hate it as much as I'm letting on. I just don't think it's as good as people say it is. I think there's a lot of flaws that come into play, and if Henry was replaced by someone else, like Willie, I think people would hate it still, and even if they acted the same way.
11 o'clock! Dad, 11 o'clock! What happens at 11 o'clock? 12, 11, 10, 11 o'clock, fire!
And because they wanted this to go back to the formula of Raiders, if they took the seriousness of Raiders, got rid of the comedy in this one, I feel like it would have been a better movie. Comedy's fine when it has its place, but if it's forced into every line, then it becomes meaningless.
What do you think you're doing there? Get down! Dad, we're well out of range.
So I definitely don't hate it, but it doesn't live up to Raiders either. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Or a 7 out of 10. It doesn't really matter to me. I don't really regard this movie as anything special. Now I'm probably going to get crucified for talking shit on The Last Crusade and then trying to say something good about Crystal Skull. In my eyes, everyone loves The Last Crusade. Me saying something bad about it's not going to change how people feel. Everyone loves it. It has great reviews. But everyone shits on the Crystal Skull, so I want to try looking at it from a more positive view. Because I don't think this movie is as bad as people make it out to be. First things first, I think the setting is great. I love the 50s vibe to it. Whereas in the 30s, it was more about Nazis and archaeology. This one is the same with the archaeology standpoint, but it moves into 50s of communism and aliens, which I do like how it has its own unique personality. And going off on the aliens, everyone has a problem with the aliens in this movie. It was the thing that was talked about the most. But I honestly don't understand that complaint. Because did you complain when there was ghosts in Raiders? Or in Temple when he ripped the heart out of the dude? Or in the Crystal Skull when there was a man living for 700 years? Did you complain about that? No, you didn't. So I don't understand why aliens are so weird in this one. I gave The Last Crusade shit because I thought the Nazis were a cop-out to use. I didn't think Elsa and Walter were that memorable as villains. In fact, I think they're the least memorable out of the entire series. Cate Blanchett as Irina, she at least has a unique character design and she stands out among all the other cast members. She makes herself remembered. She may not be the best villain, but she's at least memorable. We also get the reintroduction of Marion, which I think is great. I love seeing her back in the series. And then we get the black sheep of the cast, Shia LaBeouf. He may not be the best, but I don't think he's terrible. I kind of like his character, in a way. Does he look like a dork sometimes and act ridiculous? Yes. Does he get any character arc or any interesting plot lines? No, not really. Besides being Indy's kid, I guess, but even that, I don't care about Indy's backstory. I don't care about him getting his hat in The Last Crusade. I don't care about his kid. What I do care about is his relationship with Marion. That is actually interesting, because it follows over from Raiders. I think most negative things people have to say about this movie is because when it first came out, it was hard to digest. It wasn't like the original trilogy at all. It's kind of doing its own thing here and trying, new things, especially with the CGI, which was not perfect at all. And also the inclusion of things like the nuke blast, which is ridiculous. It's even more ridiculous than the raft scene in Temple. There is a layer of comedy to it that I did laugh at as I was watching. It is very entertaining, but from a storytelling perspective, they could have handled it better. They could have had him drive out or find like a blast shelter or something, anything besides getting into a refrigerator. And if I was gonna make fun of The Last Crusade for forced comedy and situations, this one definitely is really bad on that aspect. Thinking about the scene like when they're in the quicksand and Shia LaBeouf throws a snake for him to grab onto to get out, it's ridiculous and it was so forced.
Grab on!
Let's grab it, Indy. It's a rat snake.
Rat snake from the big.
Well, this one is size.
What I thought was even more ridiculous than the vine scene of Mud swinging through the trees was when they get to the ants, and it's like these killer ants chasing these characters. I thought it was just ridiculous. I think one of the funnier moments in this is at the very end when Marion and Indy get married, and they kind of allude to Mutt being the next Indiana Jones, and Indy just snatches the hat out of his hand and puts it on. I thought that was hilarious, and I love that they ended with that. I also remember I had a toy car of this vehicle in it, and I remember just playing with it all the time when this movie came out. And since I haven't seen it in years, and this was practically my first time watching it as an adult, and can analyze the movie for what it is, it's definitely not terrible. It's definitely worse than the other three, I'm not denying that, but what I am saying is it's not terrible. I don't actually think that the new Indiana Jones coming out will be terrible just by default. I know a lot of people said that they didn't like the trailer for it, although with the new trailer that dropped, people are starting to have hope again. I think the CGI in that is as worse as Crystal Skull. I think they're just making it for money at this point, but I'm still gonna see it because it's Indiana Jones and I'm interested in what they're doing with the character. But I think it's like Temple of Doom or the Crystal Skull. If you go into it with no expectations and just go for the enjoyment factor, I think you can find something to like about it. That's pretty much it. I don't have anything else to say about this franchise. I think it's a really good series and I understand why people love it a lot. I think it holds up pretty well by today's standards. There are some things that I would change or would like to see improved, but, Indiana Jones 5, we'll see how it is. Maybe they'll fix everything that Crystal Skull did wrong. Or maybe they'll make it worse and it'll just be funny to laugh at. This video definitely was an insane amount of work, and the editing process took me hours to complete, but I'm glad that I watched this series, and I want to do more series in the future. Maybe Star Wars, definitely Harry Potter, X-Men, Marvel, we'll see where it goes. So if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe, like, comment what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next video.